Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In today's lecture, in continuation with the series on Indian sociological tradition, we are going to talk about a very eminent sociologist, Indian sociologist, Professor Yogendra Singh. And was a kind of a time to kind of give remnants to him because we've lost this sharp mind in last May 2020. So it is time to kind of look into the contribution that Professor Y. Singh has done in terms of development of sociology of India and how he kind of gave a paradigm shift in terms of the study of Indian society itself. So we will look into his life, his academic life, his contributions, his administrative responsibility, and most important, how he kind of gave us new concepts, new ways of understanding society of India. So we'll try to understand Professor Yogendra Singh. He was kind of considered, he has been a large number of his students like Professor K.L. Sharma, Professor Dipankar Gupta, and many more have kind of labeled him as one of the most eminent sociologists of post-colonial India. When this was a very important time when Professor Yogendra Singh was kind of contributing to sociology of India, because we already had a set of body of knowledge which had come in from the Western perspective, and that was a way in which Indian society was looked at, and that is what he wanted to dismantle and provide an indigenous way of studying the Indian society. One of his area of focus was to understand social change and transformation, because he himself was part of the Jamindar family. He was born in a rich Jamindar family, and with the abolition of Jamindari system, he could himself be a witness to the changes that was taking place, and whatever theories he read in terms of the Western theories of social transformation in terms of caste, village and family did not satisfy him, and therefore he wanted to kind of reinvent a sociology of India. He kind of is concerned, his most important classical work for which he is renowned is Modernization of Indian Tradition. And to understand the social change and transformation, to understand modernization, because this was also a process which was the core of sociological thinker, how society in India, which was labeled as tradition, was passing from a traditional social structure to a modernized Western social structure. So in most of the sociological studies, we had this evolutionary perspective from a simple agrarian society to a complex industrial modern society. So religion, kinship, and home-based productions were considered as traditional, and market, rational thinking, scientific knowledge was considered as part of the modernity. And this is where he gives us an integrated approach to understand modernization and social change. And we'll see in the course of the lecture that for Professor Y. Singh, social change and modernization was not the same. There's a distinction, and we cannot kind of use the Western model of modernization or modernity to understand society in India. So as I already have said, then when we look into his biography, he was born in a very rich Jamindar family, and despite his being born in such a status, he had this curiosity to go to the field, spend time among the people and try to understand the society. With the gist of in mind to kind of do research, understand society in India, he completed his higher education from University of Lucknow. Now at Lucknow, as we have already seen in the previous lecture, was the foundation of sociology in India, because most of the eminent sociologists, or what we would call as the founding figure of sociology, were all in the University of Lucknow. The big stalwarts of Indian sociology like Professor D.P. Mukherjee, R.K. Mukherjee, D.N. Majumdar, A.K. Saran, these were all great sociologists, and Professor Y. Singh had the opportunity to be in kind of being taught by them and also to kind of learn from these big theorists. When we look into his education, after completing his higher education in University of Lucknow, he completed his PhD, Doctorate of Philosophy from Institute of Social Sciences at Agra, where he taught for a very short time, and then he was called to University of Rajasthan, where he was given the task of establishing the Department of Sociology. He also taught for quite some time at the University of Jodhpur, and then from there he was invited to kind of set up the center because of the kind of work that he did in Rajasthan, from the setting up of the department of sociology there, he was kind of invited to set up the Department of Sociology, which we now know as the Center for Study of Social System. And after that, from 1971 till his superannuation, he continued to be teaching the masters and MPhil PhD students. A large number of students, especially very important, all of them who are kind of became eminent sociologists themselves, completed their PhD under his guidance. And even after his retirement, he continued to be a part of CSSS as in terms of Professor Emeritus. So he had almost spent more than 3 to 4 decades in the center, and throughout, from say right beginning from 1970s to the till he passed away, he continuously went on writing on Indian society, and there was a wide range of topics or issue that he kind of did research. And he was a kind of very vocal speaker, and all his students were kind to learn new things whenever they heard his lecture, or he talked in any kind of a seminar and workshop. Besides being a Professor Emeritus at the Center for Study of Social System, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Singh was also visiting faculty at the University of McGill in Canada and University of Stanford at the United States. So he had an international claim as well. Besides teaching, besides his academic, because his theories kind of made an impact on the administration and people in at the bureaucratic level, he was kind of assigned the task of research advisory in the Committee of Planning Commission, and he was also the member of Indian Council of Social Science Research. He was the convener of the CEC-UGC National Plan of Sociology. So he kind of becomes the one of the founding figures of laying the ground for the development of sociology, from setting up the departments at very university to drafting the syllabus in terms of what the student syllabi should be in at different level. He was involved at every stage in kind of institutionalizing sociology of India. He also served as the president of Indian Sociological Society, which kind of comes out with a sociological bulletin and is kind of consists of contribution by most sociologists from across the country. He received the Indian Sociological Society Lifetime Achievement Award in 2007, and besides he had got he was recipient of various awards and acclaimed. One of the award that he received was the Best Social Scientist Award by the government of Madhya Pradesh. So we no doubt know that Professor Y. Singh was not only a kind of a sound teacher, he was a prolific writer, and as well as into the administrative management of the discipline of sociology. And therefore, it would be not very do any justice in terms of understanding his contribution. This is a very brief understanding of what he has contributed. As I already said, he researched and wrote on a wide range of topics. Some of them are Indian modernization, social stratification in India. He was kind of not very happy with the theory that we got from Western society to understand caste, class, gender, kind of a stratification in India, and he observed his own understanding of the rural society and how caste class linkages help to understand hierarchies and ranking. He also tried to understand profile of Indian sociology and Indian social science in general. So he has written widely. He campaigned for a cross-fertilization between structural and cultural approach. This is very important to keep in mind, that Professor Y. Singh made a distinction between cultural change and structural change, which we will try to understand when we talk about social change in India. And as I already said, he was for integrated approach. He was of opinion that no one particular kind of approach could be suitable to understand India. For instance, we cannot just apply a functional approach, or we cannot just apply an Marxist approach. We need to integrate all of these approach and kind of make sense of society in India. And the reason why he says that we need an integrated sociology for India, for the study of Indian society, is because Indian society itself was kind of heterogeneous and complex, and therefore we cannot just kind of apply an evolutionary theory and say that in Indian society tradition has given way to modernity or caste has given way to class. And now we know there's so much of theorization on the fact that caste and class coexist in Indian society, tradition and modernity, they coexist in Indian society, and therefore there is therefore his call for an integrated approach to study society in India. His areas of expertise kind of ranged from theory to understanding culture, to understanding modernization, stratification, and in terms of he's also kind of worked on the understanding of human mind, human body, and therefore he kind of also played a very important role in terms of extricating Indian sociology from the British anthropology, because the British anthropologists gave us a kind of unilineal evolutionary model, and most of the understanding of society in India was based on a comparative perspective. India was always compared to the West. So if the Western society there was a class, it was argued that in before contact with the West, Indian society was tradition, it was caste based society, and after contact they kind of leads into class society, and that's kind of was credited to the Western influence. So that kind of an evolutionary unilineal study of society, say from caste to class, from joint family to nuclear family, from village to city, was not at all kind of suitable for understanding Indian society. And the most important work or the pioneering work that Professor Singh has done in terms of understand or giving us a very integrative tool or technique to understand the understand modernization, because in his work he kind of tells us that modernization is not only understanding shift from one particular kind of social structure to another. There has to be a kind of change in the cultural pattern as well as the structural pattern in order for the kind of change to take place. And when there is a shift from one structure to the other, it is only change in the system. It's not change of the system. So the structure as per remains same, and therefore this is the most important or the most intriguing contribution that Professor Singh gave to in terms of understanding society in India. As I've already said that he has kind of written a wide range, there's a large number of work, books, monographs, articles. Here we will just look into some of the major work. Modernization of Indian Tradition, which was published in 1973, Social Stratification and Social Change, which looked into the nature of stratification, ranking, hierarchy in Indian society, was his second publication, published in 1978. Indian Sociology, where he talks about the how we can kind of have an indigenous sociology which we developed on our own understanding of society in India and not just kind of compare it with the Western society. Another book which he published quite late was Cultural Change in India, and then Ideology and Theory in India. We know that modernization of Indian sociology is one of the most classical book written by Professor Singh, because it opened up new horizon for understanding society in India and also trying to give a new direction to the discipline of sociology itself. Besides this major work, he has also written 10 monographs and books. Images of Man is one of the monographs, which was published in 1983. Ideology and Theory in Indian Sociology, published in 2004. He was the editor of Social Science Communication, Anthropology and Sociology, where he dwelled on the significance of science and communication. When we look into his contribution, it helps us to kind of ground sociology of India at a very empirical level. It's not only kind of basing our understanding on the Western understanding of Indian society, but based on empirical reality on how the transformation was actually taking place. So when we look at him as a theoretical, as a thinker, or in terms of which theory he was kind of more found it more suitable for understanding society. He was comfortable with all the Western thinkers, whether it be Durkheim, Simmel, or Talcott Parson, Dahrendorf, or Levi-Strauss. He was equally, there was no kind of a bias towards one, which generally happens whenever one is reading these Western thinkers, and we've seen it for many, that one would say that one is more Durkheimian or is more close to Talcott Parson, is adopting Parsian model of understanding. Unlike these Professor Singh was comfortable with all of them, and when we read his tribute that many of the scholars have done, we see that they were in one lecture he would be called as Talcott Parson, in the other he would be kind of made similar to Dahrendorf. So that was his personality. He would fit in any of these thinkers when he was teaching, and he did not like to be identified by any particular theorist or a school of thought. He was comfortable with all, and he kind of advised that it could be read them and kind of try to take on from what they have theorized, and not just kind of reproduce them, critically examine and see the suitability in terms of understanding society in India. So it was very important for Professor Singh to connect theory to empirical reality. So he said that theories would make no sense if we were not able to apply that theory in understanding reality. If social reality was not able to be comprehended with the help of a theory, then theory was in a way it failed, and that is why he kind of gave us a tri-party alliance. He says only theory will not help. You need a theory, you need a method, and then you need data. So theory is in terms of existing literature which we have, method would be in terms of going and actually empirically doing the research, and data, whatever data which gives a reflection of the reality. The three tri-party connection or interlinkages would help us to understand reality in a more holistic manner. When we look into the methodology, it has been written by many scholars. The Y. Singh was neither a Marxist nor a functionalist, as we have already said that he did not want him to be identified by any particular thinker or theory, and therefore he did not prefer to be called as a functionalist or a Marxist. But I just said that his emphasis was on the interlinkages between theory and empirical data. And theory, he said, the application of the theory would vary from context to context. So no theory could be able to suitably explain all the different contexts. They would have to be kind of some limitation or some addition to the theory which had to be used in understanding social reality. So he relates structural, functional, structuralism, structural historical, culturalism and Marxist orientation, and constructs all these theories. He used all of them in an integrated manner in understanding social change and social stratification in India. So he applied basically an integrated approach. So we cannot call him as a Marxist or a functionalist or a structuralist. So we see that he's giving us a structural explanation as well as a cultural understanding of social change, and therefore his approach could be labeled as an integrated approach. According to Professor K.L. Sharma, who was again a student of Professor Y. Singh, we can observe three major theoretical orientation in Professor Singh's sociology. Number one is comparative historical approach, philosophical sociological approach, logical philosophical approach. So we see how these he is combining, he is comparing comparative method with historical method, sociological with philosophical method. So kind of doing a combination between different methods, he was able to arrive at an integrated approach. The fourth approach that he kind of uses is a structural functional approach, and the fifth is statistical positivistic approach. Now statistical positivistic approach in itself would say what was kind of emerging with the discipline of sociology was emerging, which was kind of called as a positivist science or a scientific study of society. And in the positivist approach, the emphasis was on data, on quantitative data. Therefore he is kind of looking into statistical positivistic approach. We can see that how wide his reflection, because most of the time whenever we kind of look into a Western scholar or any other scholar, we see that the theory is kind of restricted to one particular approach or one particular school of thought. Here we have a kind of a person who is using all the existing approach in terms of a combined, and that combination helped him to understand the reality of Indian society, and therefore his theory was kind of distant apart from dogma. So now we try to understand, after looking into his methods, we'll look into what kind of contribution he has done in terms of the emergence of discipline of sociology of India. So in one of the most recent work, Ideology and Theory in Indian Sociology, which was published in 2004, Professor Y. Singh examined the normative and ideological foundation of Indian society with reference to its theory and methods, where he was kind of trying to understand two sociological concept: social structure and tradition. So social structure would be a network of relation, and tradition, in most of the existing literature, it was kind of referred to the past, something which had already been passed off. But in terms of Y. Singh understanding, tradition would be well existing in the present. It has nothing to do in terms of a dichotomous understanding between tradition and modernity, but he says that there is a kind of a continuity of tradition. So these two, with the help of these two terms, social structure and tradition, he tries to capture the landscape of the reality of Indian society and makes an attempt to understand the social transformation and change that was taking place. When we look into his contribution of understanding Indian society, he tells us that the Indian sociology can be placed in 4 stages, that it has passed through the 4 stages. This is based on the review of the work that existed prior to Professor Y. Singh. So the kind of does not separate them in terms of any particular scholar or any kind of area of study, but on the fact that each of these stages that he is identifying has a distinctive characteristic or has a theoretical orientation. In very simple word, he would kind of was doing a review of the sociology of India in terms of theory and method, and kind of delineating 4 different stages in terms of how the theory and methods were adopted by the sociologist. So since the 1970s, he further observed that Indian sociology had witnessed a multiplicity of discourse. So till 1970, he ranges it into 4 stages, and then after 1970, he was of opinion that there are a number of approaches which were being used simultaneously, ranging from dialectical historical to critical sociology to symbolic phenomenology. So Indian sociology was kind of evolving, and multiple approaches were being used. So if we look into the 4 stages, we see that the first stage was the philosophical. He terms it as philosophical, which was 1952 to 60. The second stage was culturological. Culturological phase was from 1960 to 65. Structural, which was from 1967 to 70, and dialectical historical from 1970 to 77. Dialectical historical is kind of Marxist perspective to understand society. If we look at the 4 stages, the first stage, which is the philosophical stage, there was theoretical orientation in Indian sociology, and this was kind of associated with Professor Radhakamal Mukherjee, D.P. Mukherjee, A.K. Saran, and this was a period when sociology was emerging. It was kind of making an attempt to adapt itself, to innovate itself. So it's just the origin, it's just the genesis of the discipline, and this orientation does not kind of make much impact on Indian society according to Professor Singh, because it was adapting existing theories. It was kind of also in the process of starting new thing. The second was culturological orientation, which begins with the work of Srinivas, because Srinivas kind of studies the religion among the groups of society. So he gives us a lot of concept that we have already done when we were looking at Srinivas' work. We know he's given the concept of Sanskritization, Westernization, and he understands social change in terms of concepts, and also the understanding that there was a level of cultural change which was happening in society. This period marked a significant shift, and priorities began to change. And the third was structural phase. In the structural phase, the focus was on power structure, social stratification, family structure, demography. So 65-70 we see a lot of literature in Indian society looking into change in family structure, how there was a kind of need to control population, so the demography was changing, and there was a lot of literature on understanding how the process of westernization, modernization was changing the structures of society. That is why it's kind of termed as structural. So the empirical abstract ideas were converted into reality. Structural was taking in account a comparative perspective, and this was a period that Weissing says it was a period of self-awareness and growth of a new direction. So there was a lot of effort to kind of develop their own methods, their own theory to understand society. The fourth was dialectical historical, which as I said was a Marxist approach, and in this from 1970-77, which we see a lot of violence, lot of conflict happening, and therefore this kind of an approach becomes important, that structure was not kind of stable. There were a lot of conflict, there was a lot of differences, there were a lot of competition, and how society was making adapting to these was important to understand. So Professor Weissing says that after 1970, this dialectical approach says that the discipline was emerging, it was kind of becoming mature, and it was attempting to arrive at this new kind of a discipline of sociology. So by looking into the emergence of sociology right from the beginning till 1977, it gives us that this approach is kind of helping to understand the society in India. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.